Thank you so much, everyone. Again, my name is Laurel, and I am very honored to have the privilege to introduce this fantastic panel. They are going to be speaking with us today about solutions that they are working on at the state and local level to try and break down those barriers to housing and employment. And so we do have some questions that I will be asking each of them, and they will be sharing their information with you. But we know that this is a short panel, and we have 5 incredible people representing 5 incredible types of work up here. So if we are not able to answer all of your questions and give you all the information you want to know, we encourage you to come speak with our panelists later on during today's event. So first, I am going to go ahead and just start here with Shari, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then please describe the program, the project, or the organization that you are working on to help justice-involved individuals or crime survivors access housing and employment.
I don't know why I took the seat. I thought she was going to start from the other end. But good afternoon. My name is Shari Ware. I am the founder and executive director of an organization called Still Standing. We are a faith-based 501c nonprofit organization that walks with and stands shoulder to shoulder with survivors of crime. We empower our survivors with the tools to become and maintain a whole, healed, and healthy and safe lifestyle. So while doing this work, we realized to eradicate domestic violence, we had to be able to work from both ends of the spectrum. And in 2012, that led us to create a program called Redeemed Battery Intervention Program. Statistics tell us that 95% of the people that are using violence and behaviors are men. So Redeemed is an all-male educational battery intervention program that interrupts the lives of men who have chosen to use violence and or abusive behaviors. We are advocates for restorative justice, promoting restoration over incarceration. We create an environment where men receive hope, healing, and transfiguration through personal accountability, increasing the safety of women, children, and society. So when it comes to housing for Still Standing, we are a liaison for crime survivors. We act as a bridge between the client and the housing programs. So we have, in our community, built partnerships as well as collaborations, and we offer those survivors of crime the resources that they need, usually giving them housing lists, and also organizations that we know that are doing the work. So if we send them there, just as Hassan also mentioned, that if we send the client there, we send that client there to make sure that they get what they need, not to just be bounced around from this organization to that organization. And when it comes to employment, we also do the same thing with our survivors of crime who are looking for employment. But Still Standing also on site provides what we call direct services. So we will help those survivors build a resume. Also, we do mock interviews. We work with the work readiness to have them ready to go out to apply for the job and also to interview. We do also teach entrepreneurship workshops as well.
Hi, I'm Angie Sprink, and I'm the community coordinator for Region 4 Offender Success Program, which is a Michigan Department of Corrections program. And we offer various gap-filled services, so such as residential stability, which is housing, employment services that will cover job readiness, job placement, track retention, social support such as public transportation, private, clothing vouchers. We help them with their identification. Many are now coming out with their vital documents, but they still need a state ID or a driver's license, so we'll assist with that. Mentorship. We have a program called CLEAR, which is pretty well known in the state. It started in Grand Rapids with Grand Rapids Police Department. We now have that in Muskegon, where we partner with Muskegon Heights PD, and we now have it in Ottawa County. We partner with Holland Police Department. Behavioral health, so we can cover CBT, batters intervention. In my region, we're now looking at having trauma-based counseling. So we're looking at how we can have that put into place in the region that I cover. The region that I cover is a 13-county region. The 2 counties I spend the majority of my time in are Kent and Muskegon. And with housing, I said we do offer residential stability. So on any given time in the 13 counties that I cover, we can have 110 beds filled. If I include shelters, we're pushing over 200. So that just gives you an idea of homelessness with those that are coming out of incarceration. And then, as I'd said, with employment, we do job readiness, job placement. We have a truck driving program that was started over on the west side of the state in our region. It's now statewide. And in Region 4, we've put over 40 people through that, 39 men, 1 woman. And the success rate is 94%. Out of the 40 of those, I do the vetting process. I stay involved with them. I've only had 1 return to prison. So across the state, we've put over 100 men and women through it, and the success rate is 97%. So we are looking at other ways of how can we mirror that to get people into jobs that are careers, not just temp jobs, minimum wage jobs.
My name's Angie Spitzley. I'm here from the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and we're part of that MDOC Offender Success Program, a very small part, actually, when I hear of all the other stuff they do besides housing. What we have is a program, an MOU that was set aside between our department and the Department of Corrections to set aside housing choice vouchers to assist people that have been recently released from prison into getting them vouchers and finding them a place to live. Currently, our program, there are over 80 people leased up throughout the state. Right now, there are 100 vouchers allocated to this program. That number could possibly go up. We also have a few people that have vouchers, and we, along with people from the Department of Corrections, are looking for places for them to live.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Peterson-Jones, and I work with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. I work in the HIV prevention and care section. A lot of our work, we work closely with Michigan Department of Corrections, and we work to ensure that our clients living with HIV at one of our male prisons or one of the only female prison here on Valley not only know about their diagnosis, but also know about services that will be available while they're in prison and also upon their discharge. We work closely with MDOC to ensure that clients are provided the needed medical care they need while they're in prison as they're living with HIV, but also to ensure that once they're paroled out, they know what their next steps are. I'm kind of different from the other panelists here because living with HIV is a stigma, and on top of that, being incarcerated, you're stigmatized. So with the program that I coordinate, we work with MDOC tirelessly to make sure that people are treated with dignity, with respect while they're housed within the facilities. But also we work with some of my clients who are living with HIV, our peer educators within their facilities. And they talk to other young men or at the female prison. They talk to other young women about not only HIV, but your next steps once you're discharged. What are you looking for in your next steps in your life? What I can say is when I started this journey working with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, HIV was still stigmatized. And then when we started working with MDOC, and to see that clients living with HIV is also stigmatized while they're in prison, but when they're paroled out, we have to make a lot of changes and continue to educate the community about those individuals. One endeavor that MDHHS is working on is housing for returning citizens, especially those living with HIV. And we're looking at two specific areas within the state of Michigan. One is the city of Detroit, which someone in the audience noted that have a high homeless rate, but also in Genesee County, Flint, where there's a lot of the water situation and also homelessness. So I hope to bring here today to the panel to look at another side also to our clients that we serve, the health side, and understanding what their next steps may be as they continue to walk this journey.
Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? I think it's
yes.
afternoon. Good afternoon. It's one of those weeks. My name is Lucretia Insky. I'm the executive director of an organization called Urban Alliance. We are a community-based nonprofit in Kalamazoo, Michigan, that works with our city's most marginalized populations. Our programming was born in the streets, and we've been out on the streets doing relationship work since 1999. And in fact, real quick short story, but our director of outreach now, who is credited with coming up with our flagship program, was one of the most notorious gang members in the state, or in the city. He started a gang. I like to joke with him that he co-founded a gang, but he founded a gang called the Washington Street Boys. And through a relationship he had with our founder over a long period of time, where our founder loved him, didn't judge him based on the decisions that he had made or his life circumstances, walked alongside him for a period of time, accepting who he was. And in that, he found a path out because he wasn't being judged. And when he got out of that lifestyle and started to chart a different course, one of the first things he did was came to the executive director of our organization at the time and said, how do we create a program for my friends, the people that are like me, that are in these neighborhoods, who want to work, who want to provide? How do we create a program for them to go through what I did? And that was the start of what we now call the Momentum Urban Employment Initiative, which is a 6-week-long program that works with individuals that have multiple barriers to employment. Now, that's our understanding. What we see, there's a lot of state programs and there's a lot of agencies that work with people that have a single barrier. It's you have a criminal background, you don't have a high school diploma, you have a substance abuse past. But what we found is there's a large portion of individuals that have multiples. They have a criminal background, they don't have a high school diploma or GED, they've struggled with substance use, they have kids but no child care, they have needs for housing but they don't have a house. And so our program is specifically designed for individuals that have multiple barriers to reentry, and those are the big six. That's what we call them: criminal background, lack of education, lack of housing, lack of transportation, lack of child care, and substance abuse issues. And so we work with them through a 6-week-long program that includes intensive classroom time, volunteer community work experience, one-on-one mentoring. And since 2014, we put 250 people through that program. And our graduation rate is over 80%, with over 90% of those individuals entering long-term employment at a rate of about $13 an hour. And what we're seeing is this process of individuals who have multiple barriers and have been treated by a system poorly for so long, they are without hope. And one of the things that we like to say is that it's our job to provide hope for them and encouragement to them until they're able to hope for themselves. And so that means we have to get out in front of this. We have to work with employers. We have to change systems. We have to provide an environment where they're safe and they can learn and they can start the process of getting back on their feet and having an outlook where they feel like they have some control.
I can learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way.
You guys understand me? That wasn't me. Wow, I was like, I've had quite a bit of coffee, but I didn't think I was talking that fast. Is that Troy? Is it you? I told you to let me know if I was going too far, but that was a little extreme. So anyways, what we have noticed is that there's this process, that there's a lot of it's not a shock to anybody in this room, prejudice about people that are coming back from incarceration or who have these barriers. And the hard thing with prejudice is it's not based on lived experiences that any of these employers or these housing individuals have. It's a policy that was put in place. It was an attorney that was trying to protect the interest of the company. And our job is to help demonstrate that this population that we love and care about, that we call our friends, are given an opportunity. And I always say that if we believe in the rule of law in this country, right? For the most part, right? For the most part. And we could get into the rabbit hole of all the issues with the criminal justice system, but we're not going to right now. But let's just say if you committed a crime and you were sentenced, and the sentence was you had to do 5 years, and you came out, you held up your end of the deal, right? You held up your end of the deal. And as a society, we're not holding up our end of the deal. We're not holding up the fact that we agreed, because we all agreed to the rule of law, that this was the sentence for an action. The individual does that and they come out and they're continually punished for the rest of their lives. That's not on those that are returning to fix. That's on the people that are out, that have control of these systems, that have influence on these things. That's on us to change that, because they did their part. And Urban Alliance and our work is really helping employers, community members, housing associations to understand how they do their part. Because what we have to realize is we all need each other. And the job situation that you described in Colorado is much like what we are experiencing in Kalamazoo. Our unemployment rate's hovering around 3.5%, and it has for years. And they're saying, where do we find people? How do we get people to move here? The unemployment rate within certain neighborhoods is over 40%, and those are neighborhoods of color. It's not an issue of the talent's not there. It's the issue of we're not seeing the talent. We're choosing to see a stigma. We're choosing to see a charge. We're choosing to see a background, and that's the work that needs to be done, and that is what we do.
Thank you. So as you all can hear, we have some really incredible projects and organizations working in our communities. I have kind of targeted questions for each one of our panelists, but I should also invite the panelists to speak, even if the question is not directed to you, if you have something to contribute. Angie, since you have the microphone, may I start with you? In addition to that amazing programmatic work that you're doing, you also work really well with all of the diverse stakeholders in your community. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do that?
Sure. So how that first started is the Department of Corrections wanted us to have advisory councils. And so in our region, we weren't really sure what did that picture look like. So what we first did is we just brought service providers and stakeholders to the table to discuss the barriers in that community. Fast forward to now, there definitely one thing you need to recognize is the issues that someone might face in Muskegon Heights are not the same issues someone is facing in Baldwin, Michigan, or Newaygo, Michigan. So it can't be a cookie cutter approach, because those barriers have to be recognized for where the person is. So we have since broke them down to an urban and a rural advisory council. And then we went even one step further to address specific barriers. So for example, in Kent County, Grand Rapids, we formed a housing committee. Because as many of you know, and what was just talked about with the employment rate, employment it is still a barrier, but it's not the same barrier as housing. And Troy said it perfectly earlier, you have to have a base of operation. Those that are returning are expected to get a job. So that's what they hear. Get a job, get a job, get a job. Well, what if you don't have a home? How do you then go on to work and live a normal life? So we do rely heavily on Mel Trotters, who has a table here. They're a great partner of ours in Grand Rapids. They're the shelter there because we have many men and women there. So we formed a housing committee to how do we bring people to the table the way that employers have come to the table. Employers have realized they need to tap into this pool of talent, because they need employees. Okay, that's great. That means that those that have not had the opportunity are now going to get that opportunity to shine and to say, look, continue to employ us. How do we bring those to the table that we can do that with housing? So we can house them for a short period of time. Thankfully, we do have lots of landlords who will then offer rooms to rent. But let's be realistic. That is not where someone wants to end up being. They want to own a home. They want to rent a place that their entire family can live in. Quite often we see women, the day that they are released from Women Huron Valley, they're giving back their children who have been with family. Where are they going to live if they cannot return to live with their family? They're typically going to go to a shelter. So we formed a committee. How do we deal with these barriers? For example, our last one focused just on veterans who have served in the criminal justice system. I don't think people realize there are a lot of veterans in the criminal justice system. There are a lot of wonderful resources for veterans. We have seen those same resources are not offered to the veterans with a criminal history. So that's what our committee spoke to last time. So to answer the question in a long way, it's just reaching out and bringing those partners to the table. We work in silos, and I didn't really realize that until the first time we did it, when we brought everyone together. We kind of all get in our own lane and we stay in our own lane. Well, we have to get in each other's lane. We have to know what each other is doing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's already doing something good, then let's do that too. So it really wasn't hard to bring those people together because they all serve the same purpose. We all work with returning citizens. So we came to the table. So for example, like I said, in Grand Rapids, we have the housing committee. Some of our rural, it's transportation committees. It's just really a group that comes together not to talk about what the problem is. How are we going to find solutions to the problem?
Thank you. Let's stay with housing. Andrew, I'm going to kind of go to you. Your program does operate throughout the state, but I know that one of the issues that you have is finding landlords. So how can communities and agencies that are working on this issue help to bridge that gap for you guys and get landlords kind of involved in this process and getting people housed through the Housing Choice Voucher program?
It's basically, raise awareness that, especially right now, the housing market is still relatively strong. People are going to, not everyone, but some people are more like willing to rent to someone else than someone who's just recently released from prison. We're having that problem even with our homeless people with just regular housing choice vouchers. They're going to be, why do we have you live here when we can have someone else with a better credit history, or any number of reasons where they would not want to have anyone with a voucher, let alone someone with a voucher that's just being released from prison. What could help is raise awareness, and that seems to be what a lot of organizations are doing. We have people like Angie, right, that are working in all 10 regions throughout the state of helping these people who are given to us from the Department of Corrections. I don't know, basically the way our program is set up, we set aside vouchers and names are referred from the Department of Corrections, and they are given to our housing agents, and then it's processed just like any other housing choice voucher, except these the people being released from prison, people through this program, have the advantage of working with people like her to help, fill out all the paperwork, to help do the legwork of finding a place to live. It's any other government program, it's very paperwork intensive. And so if there are organizations that are willing to help people with that paperwork, to help people find a place to live, to develop relationships with landlords. Region 6, it's in the Thumb. It's a relatively small area, but that housing agent has been very lucky and has been very efficient for her finding places to live. And she says the reason for that is because the person from corrections was able to establish relationships throughout the whole area not just in like 1 or 2 towns, be able to, let someone move in here. That landlord has a good experience. They start talking to other landlords like, hey, this is a good program. And it's, free money too. The state is paying a lot of the rent, and everyone likes that.
Thank you. Tracy, I'm going to kind of ask you next. You also kind of are, working for a state agency, you also work with the Department of Corrections, and you see a lot of individuals who have these kind of challenges. What for you is the benefit or some of those challenges of connecting the services that the Department of Health and Human Services provides related to housing and employment? What are the benefits of connecting public health and these services?
I think the benefit is to make people whole again. I would have to say that public health over the years, I've only been in public health for a few years. Public health was also kind of siloed and also only focused on, certain public health things and not really focusing on returning citizens or those individuals who are incarcerated. It was immunizations, family planning, environmental health. And now I see a switch or change in public health that if you're going to look at all of those areas in a person's life, you also have to look at areas that may represent a person who have been incarcerated and returning back home. And like I mentioned earlier, the program that I work for, they're really starting to focus on housing. Public health really never, in my mind, since working in HIV prevention and care, thought about the housing aspect of the individuals who either living with HIV or not. So it's a different twist, it's a different taste, it's a different feel, and I'm looking forward to what public health is going to do in this arena. One of the biggest challenges that I have found with public health getting into this venture is that I think we have to partner a little bit more with non-traditional partners. And when I say that, I'm thinking about your housing program. I'm thinking about the offender success program. I'm thinking about anything that can benefit the clients that we serve, be it those who are returning citizens and those who are not. Recently, this past year, my program that I coordinate had a returning citizen workshop. And I work with a lot of community-based organizations, local health departments, and so on. And they all came to me after the workshop saying, we never thought about this. We never thought about those individuals who may be returning back to our communities. What can we do? And one great aspect that came out of that workshop was getting to know those non-traditional partners that public health has not touched. Again, that goes back to those returning citizens programs, mental health, substance abuse, and so on. And I think just having this conversation is starting to open the eyes and open leadership within Michigan Department of Health and Human Services to start thinking about, okay, what can we do differently? With HIV prevention and with care, we have a lot of programs that can assist clients living with HIV. Like, for example, for those returning citizens who may not know, we have what we call our MIDAP program. And MIDAP is just Michigan Drug Assistance Program, that if you're living with HIV, you're a returning citizen, it can pay for your medications. Because that's one question that I receive from many of the clients that I see within MDOC is, what's going to happen once I'm discharged? Who's going to pay for these meds? They're very expensive. So awareness education, working together, and trying to improve the lives of those who are returning citizens.
Thank you. Luke, you also touched on the fact that a lot of the people who you work with have so many different things that they are trying to overcome. And so health being one of those and their history. Can you just speak to us a little bit about how you approach that? How do you treat or how do you help these folks in what kind of order do you treat them? And how do some of those challenges impact their ability to secure housing and employment?
Great question. You had thought that we talked beforehand and we agreed to what questions should ask.
Interesting, right?
Right? Yeah. So we all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Right? But we don't, when we're working with people and we're working with people that have multiple barriers, I think oftentimes we get the order wrong. We ask them to do this deep, heavy self-actualization work of finding out who they are and what they're doing. And maybe for a brief minute in the middle of a group session, they can understand what that is. And then they walk back outside into a Michigan winter and they climb into their van with their 4 kids and completely forget everything that just happened. And so for us, it's very important to help an individual secure housing, even if it's temporary, someplace where they're warm, where they're safe, where they have access to food, and get a job, be prepared to get a job. With our job market and with employers starting to make changes, getting a job is not as hard as it used to be. It's still difficult for some people in some cases, but it's not as hard. Keeping a job, on the other hand, when you don't have those needs met and you don't have employers that understand what's taking place, becomes a lot more difficult. As an example, we work closely with our graduates once they're placed in employment, and we'll liaise with the company's HR department when there's issues. And I remember a call, this was early on, this was a couple years ago, in my stint, and they said, this gentleman we love, he's been here for 6 months, he's been just an absolutely phenomenal employee, but we think we're going to have to let him go. And I said, why? What's going on? And they said, well, he's just on his phone too much. And we stopped them and we stopped the process. And I said, have you ever asked him why he's on his phone? No. It was just a behavior that they saw that didn't fit, but they weren't diving deeper into what it was. And the situation had to do with his kids, had to do with a very tenuous childcare situation where he was up against a wall and his situation has changed. His primary childcare provider was sick and his kids were staying with a family member who had a tendency to drink too much. And so he was constantly in a state of being worried about his family and their safety. And yet we often punish an individual for displaying the exact behaviors that, on the other hand, that we like to tell people that they need to have. You need to take care of your family. You need to think like this. And they're punished or fired because they're doing that very same thing. So getting a job is just a piece of it. Getting housing is just a piece of it. And we look a lot of times at the systems that we have around this state, and those of us that provide the systems will sit at these tables and we'll look and we're like, okay, you've got housing for that situation, you've got housing for that situation, you've got childcare here, you've got childcare there, and okay, you do food, you do health, you do education, we've got all the bases covered. But we're looking at it from a position of privilege and a position of us having the space and the bandwidth to see the lay of the land. We rarely stop and go down to the ground level of somebody that's trying to navigate those systems and get plugged in. Because it looks like, has anybody ever seen a map of the subway system in Moscow? It's just like loops and loops and loops. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense to us. It doesn't make sense to somebody that's coming up and trying to navigate it. There are no roadmaps. And so we can talk about covering all the bases, and in theory we do. But we're not helping people in the right order oftentimes, and we're not acknowledging the challenges that it takes to get plugged into all these different systems, and how sometimes when you get plugged into a system, the benefits from another system can drop off. You know, one of my favorite ones is we have a good relationship with most of the state providers in our area now, but we had to speed up some processes because we were doing housing assistance, and from the time that somebody would apply till the time that it was approved, they would go through our program and they'd get a job and they'd start making $15 an hour. And they'd say, oh, we were ready for you. Oh, you're making money now. Now you don't fit. And that doesn't help them. That doesn't help the order. If somebody comes out of incarceration and they go through a training program and they get a job, finding housing should not be a problem that they face. So, in short, we have to look at making sure they're safe, making sure there's food, making sure that they're steady, and then we can move into some of that other more complicated, deeper work then. But it's not us pushing on them what we think their journey needs to be. It's their journey, it's their process, and we're here to help facilitate it. And most of our systems are not designed to operate that way.
Thank you. Can I ask you to pass the microphone down to Shari? I'm going to ask you a question now. It started with you. We'll kind of come back full circle here. Shari, I know your program also really looks at the whole individual and works with them to get them where they want to be. Can you talk to us about some of those unique challenges that crime survivors face and how communities can better help them with housing and employment?
I did a comparison. Troy, do you have that slide? Normally, crime survivors are not in the arena with returning citizens, but doing this work for so many years, what we have found is that some of our crime survivors are also returning citizens. We were not equipped to deal with that when it came to barriers. So a lot of the barriers that we find with returning citizens and crime survivors are identical. Crime survivors have issues with documentation, suspended driver's license. A lot of them have bad credit or no credit because of the abuse that they have endured for years. Especially women who have children, they're, no child care because they don't have employment to be economically stable. So it's one of the really, really unique challenges that we have are men who are survivors of specifically intimate partner violence or sexual abuse. We have men to call our 24-hour helpline looking for resources to be able to address their issues, and we fall short. So we right now are working tirelessly every day to find other organizations in our community that are providing resources for those men who are survivors. Because what man in their right mind would go to the police and say, my wife is beating me up, or my girlfriend is beating me up? We have seen actual police officers laugh at the men and say, oh man, get out of here. So that is very disheartening and a challenge that we are working with every day to find solutions to be able to help those men who are also survivors and returning citizens on top of that. So what we have done, we set on a task force, bringing people together to talk about these issues to be able to help crime survivors as well as returning citizens who are homeless and not employed. And just a statistic on domestic violence. Domestic violence is a leading cause for homelessness for women and children. Many victims face homelessness when they flee abusive homes. Between 22 and 57% of all homeless women report that domestic violence was the immediate cause of their homelessness. What do we do with that when there is little to no housing for the women who are in situations where they are fleeing in the middle of the night? So Amy, one of the co-founders of Still Standing, is here, and she answers that 24-hour helpline 24/7. And when I say 24/7, I mean 24/7. to the point where she will call me at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, "Hi, I have a lady that's hiding in McDonald's from her husband. What do we do?" We have to make a split decision. Do we go and pick the survivor up ourselves, or do we call an Uber, and then where do we send her? So we do a lot of that where we're also sending an Uber, or Amy will get in her car, no matter where that survivor is, pick that survivor up and take that survivor to a hotel. A lot of times we're still standing. As a nonprofit, we don't have the funding, so we pay for everything out of our pocket. We put that, aside to be able to help those survivors, and it becomes very, very tiring at times, but we can't stop. We are survivors. We have ran for our lives, and so we know how it feels to call someone and no one answers. So that's why it's so important that someone is on that line 24/7 to be able to help that person. So what our community can do for us is, first of all, let's come out of our silos. Basically, all of us in this room are doing the same work with different populations, but we have the same end goal. We want people to be safe. We want them to be healed. We want them to be whole. And so if we all come together and band together, and just like Angie said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Because what we don't provide, Angie's agency may provide. What Angie's agency doesn't provide, Luke's agency can provide. So if we all come to the table and share, because our lanes intertwine, it's an intersectionality between all of us. We intersect at some point in the work that we do. So what I think that we could do is start connecting and start talking to each other more. And then our policymakers, they must be willing to work to ensure that safe, affordable housing is available to crime survivors, as well as returning citizens and employment as well. Just one other thing that I want to say about crime survivors is we have joined an organization, a national organization called Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, CSSJ. And what that organization is doing is elevating the voices of crime survivors. Just like Amy did today, we do digital storytelling, where crime survivors tell their stories. We go to Lansing and in California to be able to tell the lawmakers what we want as crime survivors. All crime survivors, including myself, I didn't want my ex-husband to go to jail and they throw away the key. I wanted the violence to stop, and I wanted him to get help. So when we begin to talk about forgiveness, that's a hard thing. I probably could just drop the mic right now. Because people don't want to talk about forgiving those who use violence and abusive behaviors. So you will never ever hear me call a person a perpetrator, an assailant, an abuser, because we begin to label people. When we begin to labels are hard to remove. But if we talk about the behavior, it's violence and abusive behaviors. And if we believe that violence is a learned behavior, where did it come from? It had to come from somewhere. So where did it come from? With our battering intervention program, I take the men all the way back to their childhood. We have to be willing to find out, and not to make excuses. We have to be willing to find out what happened to that man. What happened to that man, because he wasn't born to say, okay, today I'm going to rob somebody, or today I'm going to beat my wife. I'm going to rape that woman. What happened to that man? And I'll say too, what happened to that woman? Because women also perpetuate violence. So what happened? If we are not willing to take the time to find out what happened to that man or that woman, we don't know their stories, but we judge people. Oh, they do bad things. Why? Do you ever ask them why? So I think that as a community and as a people who love the communities that we serve, we have to be willing, first of all, to forgive ourselves for being judgmental, for labeling, for pointing our fingers, and we don't even know those people's stories. So if we can come together and forgive, I think we would get a lot further than where we are now by helping crime survivors and also returning citizens when it comes to homelessness and employment.
Thank you. That's very inspirational. And I would argue that all of you are doing incredibly inspirational work and are being very successful in the work that you're doing. I'm going to ask a question and open it up to anybody who would like to answer. But can you share with us and those in the room who are interested in maybe starting something like what you have done, what was necessary for you to receive to be successful? I've heard coordination. I've heard perhaps funding. What kind of things did you need to be successful, or what could you receive now to be more successful?
We could use funding to be more successful. And we're working toward that, writing grants. We don't like federal or state grants, so we really search for foundational grants and also donations, and we do fundraisers as well. We also, to be successful, we need avenues for economic stability. You know, job protections, benefits, fair pay, child care, affordable housing, and also shelters, because the shelter situation in Detroit is a wreck. I'm going to go off track for a minute, okay? So when Amy and I first started this in 2007, 2009, we were able to call the shelters directly. So in Detroit, we have one domestic violence shelter that has, 36 beds? 36 beds. And winter, spring, summer, fall, those beds are always filled. So we could call the shelter directly for a client and say, hey, you know, we have a lady who needs a place to stay, and they could do that directly. But now they have this whole system, it's called CAM, where now the survivors has to call CAM and they have to set up an appointment, and it's just too much red tape. So for emergency assistance for women who need a room right now, like that lady who was at McDonald's, that lady could not get into a shelter the way that the system is set up in Detroit right now. And so we are working to, I don't want to say dismantle, but to rearrange it where it is more survivor friendly. I'm probably going to stop talking, because if not, I'll keep going.
And I did see Luke raise his hand that he wanted to answer this question as well.
I think I'm tempted to tell the story that Troy wants me to tell. But I think we have to see ourselves in the people that we're working with, and we have to realize that we're not any better. And I'm going to humor Troy by teasing out part of this story. But about a year into me doing this job, and this was not a job that I picked, this was a job that an opportunity came up, and I started operating in. And I was working and helping individuals who'd been incarcerated get placed in jobs, and I really, really didn't understand really what was going on. And by that I mean I didn't really understand my privilege, if that makes sense. And so we had a young man that was going through our program, and he was probably the gentlest father I have ever seen. He had a daughter that he adored. He had made some bad decisions, and he was trying to climb back out of the hole that he acknowledged that he dug. And so as he was going through our program, he was working a kind of a bad job, but he had to get some money, and he was working third shift in a rural community. And he had never missed a day. And he showed, and then a Thursday showed up, and he wasn't there. And Friday, he wasn't there. And Monday, he wasn't there. Tuesday, he came back. He looked a little roughed up. You could see the pain written all over his eyes. And thankfully, we were in a space where we didn't have to ask a lot of questions because he didn't want to talk. A year later, after he was successful, he stopped by the building and was just checking in and saying hi. And I don't know what prompted me or why I had the guts, but I asked him, I said, what happened? Why did you drop off? And he tells a story that goes something like this. He was leaving work, third shift, so it was 7:30 in the morning, right? And he was in his car at a stop sign, getting ready to turn on a 131 down where it's not a expressway, it's just a little highway. And a cop pulled in going the other way, was passing him. Now, this young man is African American, and the community that he was in was largely white, and the police department was largely white. Now, I won't say his name, didn't have a driver's license. He probably had 10 tickets for not having a driver's license. He knew that whole routine. He still had to get to work. So when the cop pulled a U-turn and pulled out behind him, he knew what he was expecting. He's going to get another ticket. And what he got instead was roughed up, charges of resisting arrest. If you met him, you know him. That's not him. He was profiled simply because he was black in the wrong part of town, the wrong time of day. And as he's telling the story, I'm just like, my heart was just heavy because he was trying to do all the right things, provide for his kids, get over the limitations. And what really, really hit me was when I found out where that was, because 20 years prior to that, I had been pulled over 100 yards from when he was pulled over. And unlike him, was committing a felony. I was driving 97 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone. And the cop pulled me over, and after he could tell I was sweating and knew I was in deep trouble. He said, "Do you know how fast you were going?" I said, 70-ish. And he said, cars you were passing like they were standing still were going 70. He asked for my driver's license and went back to his car. Now, I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure I was committing a felony. Right? Reckless driving. I didn't get a ticket. I got recommendations for defensive driving school. The cop knew somebody who knew my dad, who knew somebody that at a church, and I let go. And yet somehow as a society, we look at people like this guy that got pulled over for driving without a license and got another charge as somehow that we're better than them. We just haven't been caught. I see a lot of people in here that were old enough to thankfully grow up before the age of social media. But if there had been social media during our childhoods, I'm pretty sure there'd be things that we had probably wouldn't want to be public. And yet somehow we operate and we look down on individuals that were caught. We've all done things that we are not proud of. We've all done things that we wish we could take back. We all have been in situations that we shouldn't have been. And yet, when we provide our services, somehow we're still looking down our nose at people that have been caught. And that has to stop. If we want to do this work, if we want to do this work right, we have to attach our success to their success. And we have to acknowledge that we're better together and that we're a lot the same. And if we can't do that, I think we should say, why are we doing this work? If we can't do that, we're no better. We're no better. A couple different situations, and I could have went down a completely different track. A couple different situations, and you could have gone down a completely different track. There's opportunity that's in play. There's structural and institutional racism that play that all factor into this, and we are all in this mess together, and it's going to take all of us working together and attaching our success to your success, attaching our organizational success to the success of another organization. We're not in competition. We want the same thing, and it's time to recognize that and drop our organizational egos and say what's best for the community. And I would pose this question, and I think this is one that we've been asking a lot, is if you were put in a situation in the current industry that you're in where you could solve that problem, but you wouldn't have a job, would you still make that decision? Yeah, it should be yeah. Because honestly, if we solve that problem, you're not going to have a problem finding another job on another problem that needs to be solved. Yet so often I see organizations stopping short of really putting the full force of effort behind an issue because they're like, man, I only have 5 years until I retire. What? These are people that we can impact their lives, and we have to say, this is successful, even at our own demise. We're not in this for the money. I don't think so, because the money's not very good.
What money?
We're not in it for the money, so why are we making decisions like that? Let's act like we can actually solve these problems. Let's celebrate when we solve these problems. Let's pool resources. Let's attack stuff aggressively, because when we do that, we can maybe start to make a dent in these issues.
Thank you. And unfortunately, we are right at the end of our time, but I know, Angie, it looks like you wanted to say something with regards to this question. So can we hear from you? And then again, after this panel is over, if you would like to hear more from any of our panelists, I encourage you to connect with them, because I know they have a lot more to share with you than they have been given the time to do so. So Angie, why don't you kind of wrap it up for us?
Sure. So basically, just to go off what Luke said, and in this, I think it's twofold. You need to educate yourself, and by what Luke said, you need to know the population who you're working with. When people say to me, what's the thing you like most about your job? It's when I'm in the prisons. It's when I get to sit down with the people who I work with and really find out what are those barriers, how do we overcome them, and how do we work as a team to do that. And then in turn, I think you need to recognize that you are bigger than your job, in the fact that you can educate society. I cannot be blind to the fact that I educate people. People will sometimes take what I have to say if I go to bat for someone. For example, with the truck driving program, one of the companies that first came to the table said, we are willing to look at most crimes, but we don't want to interview anybody that has a violent crime. And I literally said to him, I do not work with people who stole gum. That is not the population I serve. That is not who I work with. And I need you to just take a chance on someone. The first 4 people they employed were second-degree murder, armed robbery, CSC 4th, and home invasion. And today they will tell you they were the best employees that company has ever had. So you do need to recognize that you are a voice, and you need to use that.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you, not only for being here today and sharing your wisdom, but also for the work that you're doing. You're making a huge impact in the community. Thank you.